So, with the release of Set 6, we got some playables for Hexaorb, and even in Set 7, we got some nice cards that we get, and there's of course the addition of the promo that came out, which boosts this deck's playability almost doubled it, basically. It's a very fun deck now. It has a lot of interesting plays, despite its flaws, and it can actually take some games off some Tier 1 decks right now. It's also very cheap, so if you're thinking of getting anything into D format, because it's very expensive right now, this deck is not expensive at all. I think the most expensive thing is like a $2-3 card. But let's get straight into it. I think this deck's really fun, and I have some interesting choices that I want to talk about. So we are still playing the Hexaorb Rideline, a very simple one. The grade 1 just counterblast 1s, draw 1s when she's written over by the grade 2, and the grade 2 is actually the more interesting one. The grade 2 stacks 3 cards on the top of your deck when it's written by Hexaorb Sorceress. This is very important because not a lot of cards in D format actually go 3 cards deep. Most of the cards in D format actually go 2 cards deep, and to be able to go 3 cards deep, it means you can swing with your Vanguard, and you can actually stack a defensive trigger. This is really powerful in D format. Defensive triggers are incredible defensive tool to like actually have. This is basically the only deck that can kind of have that privilege, and it just really helps your guarding and everything like that. And there's something in this deck that fucks it up, but I'll get to it when I get to it. But there's some other options like the Blast of Dark Rideline, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But Pentagleam is being able to stack 3 cards on top of your deck for your grade 3 turn, and then also defensively stack. It's a really nice thing to have, which is why I still choose this Rideline over some others. And then we have Hexaorb. I'll obviously go through her more through the profile, but her first effect and her second effect, both incredibly strong. And even the first effect, more than the second one to actually stack and triple drive, is arguably more impactful. But I'll get to it when I get to it. But this deck lives and dies by Persona Rides. And so we have obviously our 3 Persona Rides right here, and then I'll get into this right now. We have 3 more copies of Persona Ride with Tatris. And Tatris just says, when you grade 3 or greater, you can count -1 and search this copy of the Persona Ride out. It says Hexaorb specifically. Now, this card is very annoying. So if you haven't noticed, this card conflicts with Pentagleam, because Pentagleam stacks your deck, and then if you don't have your Persona Ride, but you have this, you have to go search your deck, meaning that you are shuffling your deck. Shuffling your deck is very annoying in this deck because there are cards that stack your deck and they condense your deck down so you can actually make sure you consistently hit triggers and more than one trigger, because that's how this deck operates. She is the only card in this deck that actually shuffles your deck, and it is extremely annoying when you have to resolve her. But if you don't know anything on the top of your deck already, then you obviously want to counterblast 1, and you want to get all the Persona Ride out of your deck as soon as possible. This deck is Persona Ride or die. If you hit a Persona Ride into your damage zone, the longevity of your deck and the grounding game of your deck and the power level of your deck dramatically goes down. You have to finish the game as soon as possible, and even maybe get a little bit lucky with stacking and just trying to play well. But you have to play at least some number of copies of this, 3 or 4. I don't like this card so much, and the consistency with just this much is fine. So I'm not playing 4, I'm just playing 3. And notably with this is that I said I was playing 6 Persona Ride copies, but I'm playing a Persona Ride Searcher and then 3 Persona Rides. This is very crucial because this deck has a time limit. The time limit is that you have 3 Persona Rides. If you get to a point where you've already done your 3 Persona Rides, or you only could get 2 because one got into the damage zone, you have to clear the game before that happens, because after your Persona Rides, this deck does not have a good turn. You can maybe try to finagle something with like stacking and having a decent turn if they don't have like that big of a hand, but to have any semblance of a good turn in this deck, you need to be Persona Riding. And that's why this is so annoying to have to play this instead of just more copies of Persona Ride, because obviously there's a limit, is that the deck just runs out of gas at some point. And that's, I think, one of the biggest flaws with this deck is that it just stops at one point. Like if you're forced into a grind game, decking out, or just getting through all the Persona Rides, you will just like stop. Like you'll have 10 cards in your hand or something like that, and you will still not be able to win because you just cannot create a good turn. So those are Persona Rides, obviously necessary. Hexaorb is one of those Vanguards that sadly needs the Persona Ride, or else they can't do anything. So now with the 6 card that really boosted this deck, it is the best card in this deck, and it is Octray Sorceress. So Octray Sorceress is first of all, her second effect is that she gains 5k on Persona Ride turns when she attacks the Vanguard specifically, and this is really nice because because of that plus 5k, she's actually one of our better attackers. So she actually hits numbers naturally by herself really nicely, and then also with the AK booster, one of those AK boosters can be her. She'll be hitting for something like 53, 63, or something like that, and those are really nice numbers because obviously the guarding is harder when you hit those like those 53, 63 like values and everything like that. But her first effect is really that was just a bonus effect because, like I said, she's one of our better attackers, surprisingly, despite her being quite vanilla. But the first effect is the reason why we're playing her, and it's because she counterblasts 1. When you grade 3 or higher sorceress on your Vanguard, she counterblasts 1. She takes the top 2 cards of your deck, and you can put them anywhere. You can put them back on the top of your deck, you put them into your hand, or you can put them on the bottom of your deck. You can't counterblast 1 and then put 2 on the bottom of the deck. But you can take the 2 cards on top of your deck, and then you can put both of them into your hand, and then 1 on the bottom of the deck, or just 1 into your hand and 1 on the top of the deck. This is incredibly good. This is just counterblast 1. You just go +1. If you have a dead card or low shield value card in your hand, you just put 2 cards into your hand that aren't triggers, ideally, because you probably want to see the triggers in the drive check. You just put those into your hand, and then you just put 1 card that you don't need on the bottom of your deck. This is just a plus. This is just raw plus. It's stacking with which this deck needs to see some number of, and she's just phenomenal for the deck. This is definitely one of the main playmakers and something you want to see at least once during the game. And you can resolve this. I've resolved this 3 times in the game. I could resolve it 4 because now we have a counter charger. She's just always good at almost every point in the game. Obviously, when her first skill is active, so after the grade 3 turn, she's just amazing for the deck, and you want to see, if you ideally want to win, you probably want to see more than 1 of her. Then we have another card that also appeared with her in the common slot. We have Quadracast Sorceress, and she's extremely simple. She's just mandatory. She's a mandatory effect, so you got to remember to actually use her effect always. You look at if you have a Sorceress Vanguard, not grade restriction anyway. If you have a Sorceress Vanguard, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and soul charge 1, and then you put it on both on top of the deck, and then you soul charge 1. So basically, you just look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 into soul, and then the other on the top of the deck. This is really nice because, like I said, you need some number of cards that actually look at the top of your deck, and then the soul charge is actually really nice because there's another card here, the promo that we'll get into in a second, that uses up Soul Blast, and then Hexaorb obviously uses Soul Blast. So you actually want a little bit of counter charging. So this fills that slot up, and then again you need some number of cards that actually look at the top of your deck. So Hexaorb is consistently hitting more than 1 trigger in your drive checks because you want to be seeing more than 1 trigger during your Persona Ride turns because you want to make sure your turns are actually the most impactful. And she just slots really nicely. Like I said, she's not grade locked anywhere, so on the grade 2 turn, this is where I usually play her. This is the only unit that I usually play early before the grade 3 turn with Pentagleam. And just making sure you hit those early triggers, like making sure that you hit a heal, making sure that you hit a draw, or even just going early and making sure you pressure with the crit is extremely nice. And it makes people guard a little bit weird because they know the top card of my deck on the grade 2 turn, and people don't like taking damage early. So this is the best target for an earlier rush, I would say. I mean, you can call 2 of these down, but you probably want to save 1 for your Hexaorb grade 3 turns. But just a really nice, able to actually stack the deck offensively, going on the grade 2 turn. And I think she's a staple 4 of, but I could see why you go down. But she's just so simple. She slots in perfectly to what you do that I think she's a mandatory staple 4 of. And now we're into the promo. So here we have our promo. We have 4-side Glow Sorceress. So when she's on the front or rear guard, when she's chosen by the ability of a Sorceress Vanguard, so it'll be the first effect here for the 10k when you hit a trigger. She gets chosen there, and then you Soul Blast 2. You countercharge 1, and then if she was increased by the effect of a trigger, so ideally that same trigger that proc Hexaorb Sorceress effect, you also draw a card. So you Soul Blast 2, and then you countercharge 1. You don't need to countercharge 1, and then you draw 1. This is just raw plussing. It's countercharging for the deck that needed it a little bit. It wasn't super needed. Obviously, with Octaway now, you probably did need a countercharger, but this is really good for the deck. It's just raw plussing. It makes sure that you can't get damage denied, and it just keeps on making sure you have a big hand. Usually you resolve this card once, sometimes twice in a game, so that's why I'm only running 3 copies of it. You can run 4 if you really want to see it, but I think 3 is perfectly fine. I just wanted to show this image. I think these are the staples of the deck. I think you want to be playing these cards at some number of copies, 3 to 4, to actually make a Hexaorb deck. I think all of these are staple. All of these have a place and are necessary to the game plan. I'm on 3, the Persona Ride Searcher. You can obviously bump that up to 4. You can bump this up to 4. You can bump this down to 3. I don't know why you would ever go down on Octavray. I think Octavray is mandatory at 4. But these are the cards that I think are absolutely necessary for the deck, and the rest you can make. The rest of this deck can be mixed matched with other pieces of support. But I think this is the core. So if you just want to get the core for Hexaorb, I would say just get these cards. I think these cards are absolutely necessary to the strategy for what the deck is right now. So the rest of his deck are utility cards that either help this deck defensively or offensively. So starting off here, I have a defensive option here, Diana Dong, Sorceress, and she's just very simple. She's a 15k shield. And this is really nice. First of all, this is a privilege in D format. Not a lot of decks get just a free 15k shield, especially this early in the game. The thing that's really nice about her is that she is active from grade 0. All you need is just a Sorcerer's Vanguard, and she's a 15k shield. That is a really nice thing. The second thing is that this is actually a really smart design card because it's a 15k shield, like the crit triggers and heal triggers in this deck, because this deck actually wants to keep at least one crit trigger in its hand, so Hexaorb can actually fulfill like its first effect to stack a trigger on top of the deck. Sorry, the second effect. And so having this means that you can guard with a 15k shield without having to get rid of a crit trigger in your hand, which is really nice for the deck. It just lets you have more shield value than other decks have because you're consistently having more triggers in hand than most decks, and you just have the quality of your hands in this deck are a lot better than other decks. You have cards like this, you have just a bunch of triggers in hand. I can have 10 cards in hand and 7 of them are 15k shields or something ridiculous like that, because you can just keep on condensing your deck, you can keep on stacking it, keep on seeing triggers. Cards like this, which are just more 15k shields, you can be super tanky with this deck and have a high quality of hand with cards like this. And over here, I'm actually not playing this right now, but this would be the card that this would be like the 51st slot or something like that, a card that I really want to play, and that's Mimaru. And she's deceptively versatile. So she says she retires herself, and then you choose a crit or a front trigger from your drop, and you put it into your hand. So this is really nice, because a grade 1 is really... So the thing about this deck is that it really wants a really good grade 1. Because if you have a really good grade 1, it helps with some numbers like Foresight Glow Sorceress, which is gonna get hit with a crit, with some kind of trigger, so you can get Resolver Effect for the counter charge and draw 1. But she's gonna hit on the Persona Ride turn. She's gonna get hit with Hexaorb, and she's gonna go up to 40k. Now 40k is not great, but if you just boost it by a little bit, by like the smallest amount, Mimaru, for example, can do that. You can put it behind Foresight Sorceress, and so this will be 40k, and then this will be 47. Obviously 48 would be better, but it's already asking for more than 2 15k shields than if this was just by itself. And obviously you have to put the power here so you can actually resolve the effect, even if it doesn't have a booster. But if you have a booster, then you can actually make it hit a good number now. So Mimaru can do that. She's also another booster. And then if it comes back to you, you can retire her and then grab a 15k shield, or a crit trigger, I mean, from your drop. And then now she got value of, oh wow, she got another card out of your hand from hitting a better number. And then she got a crit trigger or front trigger from your drop into your hand. So Mimaru was some offensive pressure, and then now she's defensive pressure, and also just making sure that you secure that crit trigger for your Hexaorb turn, and actually it helps the deck like run smoother. I'm not playing right now. You could obviously just trade these away for this, because they technically are both 15k shields, because this turns into a 15k shield. You can play 3 Mimaru instead of 3 Diana, but I just like this. It just like, let's say if I drive check something, then this is only 5k shield right now for the next turn, but this is 15k shield immediately. So that's why I'm running her. Obviously, I think I will change Mimaru in for this, because I think Mimaru is a lot more versatile, but just an incredibly interesting card. I would try to test this out and play with it. I think it's really nice just to hit those just a little bit better numbers, and then she just comes back and gives you a more defensive value. The last couple slots in this deck I think are something that need to boost the Persona Ride turns, the push turns of this deck, because there's not many great attackers in this deck, and like I said, you have a time limit. You have 3 Persona Rides, and then that's it really. So you need to make sure that when you do your Persona Ride turns, you need to kill them on first, second, third Persona Ride turn. You need to do that. So these last slots, I think, should be dedicated to boosting the power ceiling of the Persona Ride turns. So first we have Rita, and she is the restander for this deck, and she counter blasts one after the Hexaorb reveals a trigger. She counter blasts one, soul blasts one, and she restands a rear guard. So what this means is that before you swing with your Hexaorb Sorceress, you can basically get a fourth attack there with it's technically the first attack with that low powered swing. It's usually hitting for about 30, 33. It's a decent swing is what I'm saying. The thing is that I don't think you need to play this card in your deck. Now you're probably thinking, that's crazy. Of course I want to restand if I have it. The conditions aren't too hard to fulfill, obviously. So I'm going to play the restander. I don't think it's super necessary. You can definitely get away without playing this, because the way I'm playing this deck is that I'm keeping my opponent on 4 or even 3 sometimes, and I'm just trying to kill them in one swing. So a lot of the time, this restanding unit that I'm using for this, they have all the right to just eat this, and then they could hit a trigger, making it easier for guard for the rest of the turn. There's not much of a reason to not just eat the low-powered swing before the Hexaorb swing at the start of the turn, the one that this one is going to restand. And so that's why I don't think this card's necessary. I think you can definitely get away with this card, even though a restander is like hard to pass up because it's also not too hard to fulfill. That said, it is Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast 1, so you do have to think about it a little bit more. Like if you want to resolve 4 Side Glow, Hexaorb Sorceress, and this, you need 4 Soul for that. So you do need to think a little bit more like that if you are actually going to be resolving this. But she's also just a grade 1. So she's good behind Hexaorb Sorceress or some other rear guards to help get you hit those better numbers. I'm obviously still playing her, so I still think she's good. Sometimes I do get into those weird scenarios where they did get to 5, and so this is where the restand really shines. But like I said, I don't think you need to play this, even though it is obviously restander, and it is insane, and it is a nice privilege for this deck. But you can actually get away with it. But like I said, you need these slots to be filled with something to boost the power ceiling of this deck. And so that's why I'm running a card from set 7, which has been putting in a lot of work, and that is Gwendolyn. Now, Gwendolyn is really nice. She's individually the most impactful card in this deck, just by herself with not much other setup. And she is, if you Persona Ride, she gains plus 5k, so plus Persona Ride, so she'll be a 28k by herself, and then she's Guard Restrict 2 from hand. She's great. Especially combined with Rita, they combo really well together because now you have 2 swings, guard restricted for a decent number, and then obviously if you hit a Hexaorb trigger and you throw the 20k on her, now she's 48 by herself. She's individually eating the most cards out of the opponent's hand than any other card in the deck, and just by herself. She doesn't need it. She doesn't need a booster. She doesn't need any other help. You're already Persona riding in this deck. It is just a really nice. It is easily the best beater in this deck, and something that you want to try to get at least once, or at least for your final turn. So you can make sure that if they have PGs left, they're at least getting rid of 1 more card if they're going to PG and attack. This deck has been putting in a lot of work for me. I was playing against Prison the other day, and I had 2 in the front row, and I just completely shredded through their hand with it. It's such a nice addition to the deck, this random rare from set 7, and I think it really boosts like the power ceiling of this deck. I really like this card. So, of course, we have the Sentinel Blitz order, then 3 PGs. Nothing too much to say about that. Obviously, we're a grade 3 deck. We don't need to. We have the Overtrigger. It does not matter which Overtrigger you're using. Realistically, obviously, the Keter can be better because, you get the drive check more, but a lot of the units are grade 2, except for Gwendolyn, so it's only 1 more drive check. This is 2 unguardable attacks, while the Keter one is just 1 unguardable attack. It really doesn't matter. This is a blowout either way. If you have a Keter OT, then just use it. Personally, the way I play, I like the Cray one a little bit more. Having 2 unguardable swings is a lot nicer than just 1, in my opinion. Obviously, the other one would be really big, and you'll have more hand advantage with the Keter Sanctuary OT, but this one's more than fine. And then we are playing 3 draws. This is the best defensive one if you can't heal, and then obviously you want to survive until you actually see your Persona Ride, so draws is kind of a no-brainer. And then we are playing 8 crits. We are not playing any fronts. You can play, if you're playing Mimaru, you can't play 1 front, and then Mimaru can obviously grab that front from the drop at any time. But like I said, that 1 extra front can come up. This deck lives and dies by the crits in its deck to actually go for game. So I don't even think focusing on the front trigger is worth it. I think having that extra crit and seeing that extra crit more often is better than that one extra front. Notably, I don't have the effect crits in here. I just don't have them. I think they're technically optimal because obviously if you're playing Lala Rita, that can also affect like the restanding, everything like that. It's probably optimal to have that effect trigger in there. But sometimes the 5k does come up more often. It doesn't matter too much unless you have prison in your locals, like everywhere. Even then, you should be fine. You can get away without running the effect crit triggers. It's perfectly fine. It has not really come up. If you're playing like a more like combo heavy or OTK heavy version of this deck, maybe it probably comes up a little bit more. But honestly, it doesn't matter. And then of course we have our 4 heals. Nothing to say about that. And I'm not playing any effect heals because there's no reason to right now. So at this part, I want to talk about cards that didn't make the cut but are still in the pool of Hexaorb, and a lot of them are interesting, so that's why I want to talk about them. So first off, we have Kekadon. She's just a 10k shield, and she also Soul Blast 1 and looks at the top 2 cards of your deck. She's fine. There's just cards that do some stuff better. Obviously, having 10k shield and also a stacker on 1 card is nice. If you're just looking for some slots to fill in this deck, this is perfectly fine if you have it. It's okay, is what I'm saying. She just doesn't do anything interesting. She's a 10k shield, which is nice and appreciated, but like I said, you can have 15k shields in this deck, obviously without the stacking effect, but if you're looking for more stackers, but you want to make sure you're not like too flimsy, you don't want to cut down on the shield value, this can slot in there, but that's all I really have to say on her. She's not super interesting. So this is Asunono, and she's really interesting because she is the only battle phase stacker, and she discards 1, she gains 10k, and then she looks, when she attacks, then she looks at the top 2 cards of your deck, and then you can put them on the top or the bottom in any order. This is really interesting because this is, like I said, this is the only battle phase stacking this deck has, as far as I know, off the top of my head. Either way, this is the best one. And having battle phase stacking means that you can defensively stack because you can attack with this after your Hexaorb swing. So if you really want to lean into defensive stacking, and maybe there's a meta where defensive stacking is like way too good and you need it to survive, this card will come up more. But just having, first of all, she's 20k attacker by herself. Well, obviously you have to discard a card, which is already pretty good, meaning that she's hitting some pretty big numbers by herself, surprisingly. And also you can use her on grade 2 turn, so you can defensively and or offensively stack and be a 20k attacker on grade 2 turn. I think this card has a lot of potential. You can play around with it. I'm just not playing it right now because there's not too much of a reason to. If I want to get a little bit spicy and defensively stack, I would play this right now. Or if I want to do like some grade 2 rush with it, I think it'd be good. But it's a good option, and it is unique. And then there's Alwyn, and speaking of unique, this card isn't. He just stacks top 2 cards of the deck for Soul Blast 1, and then he gains some power for a Counterblast. Obviously not the greatest use of Counterblast in this deck when you have so many powerful effects. And he just looks at the top 2. It's just not, there's better cards. There's better cards that stack, there's better cards that gain power, there's better cards that are more efficient. He's just kind of got power crept. That's all I really have to say about him. Then there's Not a Fool. When you reveal a trigger in your drive check, you put a card in his soul, so she gives you a soul, and then you draw a card. So this can help you filter more, draw more. The thing is that she'd be a lot better if she was a grade 1, just like a grade 1 with 8k. But the fact that she's just a grade 2, and you just probably be throwing her into the back row because you have better attackers a lot more, it's just not really worth it unless you're really trying to dig for something. If you want to play like a Hexaorb version that like draws a lot more, or maybe you're not playing draws and you're playing fronts instead, and so this can help you get a little bit more of a better hand and also some more soul. It's not super needed right now. Like I said, if this is grade 1 and like this deck really would appreciate a better grade 1 right now. There are some decent grade 1s right now, but if there was a really good grade 1, this deck would appreciate a whole lot because there's just like really weird numbers with the rear guards in the front row by themselves. So a grade 1 would do wonders for this, but the fact that this is a grade 2 is just like, it's fine. Speaking of grade 1, we have her right here. She Soul Blast 1, looks at the top 2 cards of the deck, and she also rests herself. This is just another top checker, but it's also, notably, it's a grade 1, like I said. So if you really want a booster like I complained about with this deck, this is a decent one that also helps top checking. Again, if you just feel like you need to stack more with this deck, this card's a perfectly good option. Then we have an interesting card here. She retires herself, when you reveal a drive check, when you reveal a trigger in your drive check, and then you get to choose between a counter charge and a soul charge. So if you are like focusing on like a big Lala Rita turn, and you're trying to make sure that you always get the Lala Rita and something else, like maybe like Wendling there. You're basically just trying to make sure that your Persona Ride turns are your biggest possible Persona Ride turns. You're trying to get the most value out of them as possible. And you want to make sure you always hit those resource values like Soul Charge or Counter Charge. Then that's where she's good at like some number of copies. She's just another consistency tool, but specifically for those higher value turns. I think she's fine. She's a grade 3, and I don't know. She can also be an attacker by herself, but I think you could do better. But obviously, if you're playing like a more like I guess combo oriented version of the deck, I think that's where she can shine. And then I really quickly want to talk about the Blaster Dark Rideline. I see some lists in Japan come up with this. So I'll replace these two. And you know the thing that I said about just like, oh, there's a Persona Ride Searcher. Oops. There's the Persona Ride Searcher that fucks up the stacking of Pentagleam, so Pentagleam realistically doesn't do anything. Well, if you run this package, then Blaster Dark will obviously give you Twin Drive and can obviously actually have an effect as opposed to Pentagleam if you have to use the search effect. The reason why I tried this at first, the reason why I didn't love this was, well, obviously you can hit a Persona Ride off Blaster Javelin calling something that Blaster Dark needs to retire, so that's definitely annoying. And secondly, it's okay. Obviously, Twin Drive on turn 2 is good, but a lot of the time they can just 2 to pass you, and you don't really have that many cards that you want to throw down to make sure that they don't 2 to pass you in the back row. This could be better if this could be better than the main ride line, especially if Blaster Dark is hitting something to retire every time. But it's just another option you can do. I think the Pentagleam stack effect is just too good. You really, because if without the Pentagleam stack effect, your grade 3 turns, before the Persona Ride turn obviously, can just amount to basically nothing. And just ensuring that you always have like a decent turn, hitting those early triggers, those draw triggers to help you survive, those crit triggers to maybe pressure your opponent, the heal triggers, which are very important early. You usually want to try to stack a heal trigger pretty early so you can not die, as simply as that. But you can try with the Blaster Dark Rideline. It conflicts less with some other things, but it's not as good in my opinion, because unless you're going for some like really aggressive build, which could be fun to play, I don't think it's that worth it. But either way, that's how the deck is right now. I think it has some interesting options. It's really fun to play. Stacking your deck in D format, I hit a triple drive, 3 triggers a lot with this deck, and it is like, and sometimes it is stacking, but other times to be like, yeah, I condense that much. It is deceptively. You can just die to this deck sometimes, and they just have to take it because they just don't have a PG sometimes, or they just really don't have the value. This deck is like oddly positioned because you don't need to commit too much for its turns, and its turns are really good. And so I think this deck can actually do pretty well against some better decks. But again, it's hitting those like big turns and that draw power that tier 1 decks are doing for nothing, while this one is struggling with some consistency problems. And obviously, like I said, it has a time limit. Like having only 3 Persona Ride in your deck is really annoying. And then the fact that this deck does have a weakness to retiring a little bit. You don't really commit that many rear guards to the board, but you're also not really playing. Your hand isn't really that many rear guards because you're not drive checking rear guards. You're drive checking triggers. And so what that means is that you can just. I've had a 11 card hand and not a single good unit to call down. Because that's just how this deck goes. If you are playing against retire, it just can be really annoying to find Gwendolyn's, to find Octarays, just find any like half decent card to like call down into the front row. But other than that, it's extremely fun. It's extremely cheap. Like I said, I think Lala Rita is the most expensive card, and even then, I think she's like $2 or something like that. But this deck's really good. In the right scenario, it can just win you games. It's really fun. It's really cheap, and I know D's a little bit expensive right now. But I would try it out if you can. I think it's really fun.